The story I'm about to tell you didn't happen to me. It happened to a friend of mine. When I turned 21 and felt completely lost about my future, a girl from college told me about summer camps for kids. She explained the application process, and that summer, I signed up to be a counselor. At first, I treated it like just another job. I didn't have high expectations and assumed it'd be boring. But, to my surprise, it turned out to be one of the best experiences I've ever had. I loved it so much that, whenever I get the chance, I still volunteer at those camps. It was at one of those camps that I met Melissa. She was another counselor, and, honestly, one of the kindest and sweetest people I've ever known. Melissa was the epitome of femininity. She loved wearing pink, adored dresses, and had a soft, shy voice. Even though we were the same age, I admired her instantly, and we quickly became friends. Summer camps have all sorts of activities, and the one I worked at was perfect for me, a lover of the supernatural and mysterious. Every night, we'd gather around a campfire to share spooky stories. Most of the tales were harmless, kid-friendly, and completely made up. We always let the kids take the lead and tell their own stories. Only once did a story disturb me enough to report it to my supervisors, who then spoke with the parents of the child who had shared it. But that's not the story I want to tell you today. After we put the kids to bed, the counselors would stick around the campfire, sharing their own stories. Some of them were amazing storytellers, and even though we knew the tales weren't true, it was impossible not to get chills. Then, one night, Melissa decided to tell a story. It caught us all off guard. Melissa usually stayed quiet during these moments, but as soon as she started speaking, the atmosphere changed. From the way she told it, we could all tell this was something that had really happened to her, and it still scared her to this day. 2 years earlier, Melissa had ended a long-term relationship. After months of trying to move on, her friends decided she needed to get back out there. Since she wasn't showing any interest, they secretly created a Tinder profile for her. When she found out, she was upset, but her curiosity got the better of her. She decided she wouldn't engage with anyone but would browse the app instead. Then one day, she got a notification from a profile that stood out. The guy had a warm, genuine smile, and his pictures weren't the usual lineup of fish, hunting gear, or flashy cars. The kind of stuff guys on the app seemed to think girls found attractive. He seemed real and down to earth. 2 days later, he messaged her, and they started talking. He confessed that, like her, he hadn't created his profile either. His older brother had. As they talked more, it became clear that the brother was a troubling figure. 8 years older, he was aggressive and controlling, with a history of violent behavior, including police reports. While he never outright said it, Melissa could tell that this guy's brother made his life miserable. Despite the red flags, Melissa felt it wouldn't be fair to judge someone based on their family. None of us get to choose them, after all. After 2 months of texting and video calls, they decided to meet in person. She trusted him. He wasn't some catfish, like what had happened to a few of her friends. When he suggested meeting at his house while he was alone, she hesitated but eventually agreed. He explained that his parents were on vacation and his brother had offered to stay with friends so they could have some privacy. He picked her up at the subway station, and the walk to his house was pleasant. But when they got there, the house was breathtaking, large, and beautifully designed. While admiring it, though, Melissa thought she saw a shadow pass by one of the upstairs windows. It was just out of the corner of her eye, and she couldn't be sure. Looking closer, she noticed the curtain in that window was still slightly swaying, even though the window was closed, like someone had been there moments ago. She asked him again if they were alone, and he reassured her they were. He said his brother had left the night before, and his parents had flown out 2 days earlier. Even so, she couldn't shake the strange feeling she had. The day went perfectly. They had a real connection, but that eerie sensation of not being alone wouldn't go away. At one point, he excused himself to check something upstairs. For the first time, Melissa felt her blood run cold. What if he wasn't who she thought he was? What if this had all been a setup to lure her there? What if it wasn't his brother who was troubled, but him? She was about to make an excuse to leave when he came back down, looking panicked. He said they needed to leave the house immediately. His urgency terrified her even more. She grabbed her phone and thought about bolting for the front door. But before she could, a man appeared behind him, holding a bat. The man struck the guy she'd been talking to, knocking him down, then turned to her with a chilling smile. Paralyzed with fear, Melissa realized she wouldn't make it to the front door in time. Instead, she ran to the bathroom and locked herself in. Whispering, she called the police and gave them the address. While on the phone, she heard the man pacing outside the bathroom and taunting her. He said he had all the time in the world to wait. Melissa stayed silent, heart pounding, as he mocked his brother, calling him a loser and saying she deserved a real man like him. Then she heard dragging noises, something heavy being moved. She had no idea what was happening, but knew it wasn't good. After what felt like an eternity, she heard the man curse, followed by the sound of the back door slamming. Moments later, the front door was broken down. It was the police. The relief she felt vanished when she stepped out of the bathroom. On the dining room table were ropes, a saw, and a large handmade device that looked like something out of a torture museum. The guy she'd been talking to was found locked in a room, unconscious. His brother was caught 2 days later in an abandoned factory. Investigators found traces of human blood on the device, and he was tied to the disappearance of a local girl. Melissa never spoke to the guy again, and he didn't try to contact her. She knew it wasn't his fault, but the trauma was too much to overcome. She deleted Tinder and swore off dating apps for good. Hey, Horror Spectator here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you're always in the loop when new videos drop. We post 2 videos every week. If you're really into this content, consider sharing it with your friends. It really helps us grow this community. Now, let's move on to the second story. I've always been a discreet person. I live in a relatively small town where everyone knows each other, and the idea of bumping into someone I know on an app like Tinder makes me uncomfortable. That's why I only ever use the app when I'm out of town, mainly in Denver, where I frequently travel for work. It's almost a routine. 3 days in the city, some conversations on the app, and occasionally a date to unwind. I'm always honest with the women I meet, and more often than not, they're the ones who initiate things. What I'm about to share, though, completely changed the way I see this world. It's not a very long story, mostly because, as you'll see, I don't know half of what happened, and that's what leaves me utterly paralyzed and terrified. That week, I was scheduled to be in Denver for 3 days. As usual, I opened Tinder. Not even an hour passed before I had a match. Her name was Rita. She wasn't exactly my type, but I've never been one to focus too much on that. I've always liked trying new things, so I went with the flow. During the day, as I worked, we made plans for the evening. Rita was one of the most straightforward people I've ever met on the app, or at least that's what I thought. She told me up front that she did this often, wasn't looking for anything serious, and just wanted a fun night. She explained she had an empty house that belonged to her grandparents, which she used as both a workspace and, occasionally, for meetups like ours. It was separate from her house, and rarely used. At the time, I didn't see any red flags. It wasn't unusual for women to choose the meeting spot. It made them feel safer, and I respected that. Honestly, I even preferred it that way. Rita didn't give me the full address right away. She only mentioned the street and said she'd send me the exact door number closer to the time. When the moment came, I followed her directions. The street was quiet and not very busy, and the house looked old and kind of abandoned, but she'd warned me about that. The place had been vacant for years, and she only used it occasionally. When she opened the door, she was impeccably dressed. Not quite my type, but I couldn't deny she looked stunning. As soon as I walked in, she asked if I wanted a drink. She led me to a small, makeshift bar in the living room and offered to make me a special cocktail. Looking back, I should have said no and poured my own drink, but at the time, I didn't see any reason to be suspicious. Everything felt normal. While she was mixing the drink, she told me to relax on the couch and make myself at home. A few moments later, she came back with 2 glasses in hand, smiling and looking completely at ease. I grabbed my glass and, without thinking much, downed it in one go. That's when the night stopped making sense. The rest of the night and the entire week are a complete blank. All I have are flashes, disjointed and deeply unsettling. I vaguely remember seeing 2 huge men enter the room, and for a moment, I thought I was going to die. I woke up 6 days later in a hotel room. I was disoriented, with no idea where I was or what day it was, wearing clothes that weren't mine. When I tried to leave the room, my behavior must have seemed erratic and scared the staff, who called the police. I don't blame them. I was confused and completely out of it. What happened next was even more bizarre. I had no memory of anything beyond being in that house with Rita and seeing those 2 men. The police reviewed the hotel's security footage. And, to my shock, there was video of me checking in, as if I were fully conscious and aware of what I was doing. My phone had all the conversations wiped. The house where I'd been, which had seemed lived in before, was now completely abandoned. No furniture, no signs of life. Just a cold, empty space. I could tell the cops thought I was either crazy or had taken something illegal. They gave me the benefit of the doubt, but barely. Medical tests showed traces of drugs in my system, but other than that, I was physically fine. Nothing seemed to have happened to me, but the void in my memory terrifies me to this day. An entire week of my life, gone, as if it never existed. I deleted the app that same day and swore off meeting strangers. Now, I never accept drinks unless I see a bartender make them, and I never take my eyes off my glass. I still think about that night. Her smile, the drink I accepted without hesitation, and whatever happened in the days that followed. It's a weight I carry, a question that will never have an answer. Three years ago, I went through a heartbreaking experience. I've always been a shy guy, and for about 7 years, I had feelings for the same girl. We were friends, got along well, but I never had the courage to tell her how I felt. Deep down, I probably knew she didn't see me the same way. I was just a friend to her. Everything became crystal clear the day she introduced her new boyfriend to our group. In that instant, it felt like my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. One of our friends, who knew about my feelings, tried to cheer me up. He's the one who encouraged me to download Tinder. He'd had some success on the app himself, even starting a relationship with someone he met there. Inspired by his story, I decided to give it a shot, more out of curiosity than anything else. To my surprise, I got a few matches. Honestly, I was stunned. Many of the women were gorgeous, the kind of women I never thought would look at me twice if we passed each other on the street. Even so, my fear of rejection held me back from making the first move. I waited, and eventually, one of the women started a conversation with me. Slowly but surely, I let myself get drawn in. We chatted for about a week and a half, but a nagging doubt lingered in my mind. She couldn't possibly be who she claimed to be. She seemed too good to be true. Still, my curiosity won out, and I decided it was worth taking the risk. After several days of talking, I asked if she'd like to meet in person. She hesitated, saying she didn't know me well and felt a little uneasy. Even so, she suggested meeting at a cafe of her choice, somewhere she felt comfortable. That reassured me. The day of our meeting arrived, and I vividly remember the moment she walked into the cafe. My heart nearly stopped. She was even more beautiful in person, and to my relief, she didn't look disappointed when she saw me. On the contrary, she smiled warmly and said she was happy to meet me. In that instant, I felt like I was on cloud 9. The date went wonderfully. We talked, laughed, and neither of us seemed eager to leave. We decided to take a walk. There was a park nearby, and we figured we'd enjoy the last bit of daylight there. Things were going so well that time slipped away, and before we knew it, it was getting dark. Even so, we felt comfortable and happy to be in each other's company. The conversation flowed naturally, and I felt a genuine connection forming. But then, out of nowhere, I began to feel uneasy, like we were being watched. By this time it was dark, and we were deep in the park, far from either entrance. I've always trusted my instincts, and my friends often said I had a knack for sensing danger before it happened. Without wanting to alarm her, I suggested we head back. She agreed, and we started walking. But the uneasy feeling only grew stronger. I noticed she seemed nervous too, biting her nails, a clear sign of anxiety. Finally, I decided to voice my concern. When I told her about my fear, I saw genuine fear flash across her face. She gripped my arm tightly. That's when we saw him, a man, standing a few meters ahead, staring directly at us. My heart raced. He didn't move, just watched us. I turned around and realized another man was behind us, also standing still. We were trapped. I froze, paralyzed with fear. Then she, sensing my panic, started to negotiate with them, saying they could take everything we had as long as they didn't hurt us. The man in front smirked and coldly replied that he wasn't there to rob us. That was a direct threat. Her voice trembling, she whispered that she had pepper spray in her bag. Without hesitation, I slowly reached into her bag and told her to stay calm and follow my lead. I knew they were likely after her, and I couldn't leave her behind. We moved toward the man closer to the park's entrance. As we got closer, I noticed the man behind us beginning to follow. When we were close enough, I raised my arm and sprayed the pepper spray. The man screamed in pain, and I pushed her to run ahead of me. As she ran, I kicked the man to buy some time and started running too. The man I sprayed wouldn't be able to see for a while, but the other one was gaining on us. If I wasn't fast, he would catch up. We ran as fast as we could, with him chasing us. At some point, I realized he'd given up. He must have known we were close to the park's entrance, where other people were around. We didn't stop running until we reached the road, where there were others. We called the police, who searched the park, but the men were never found. Later, we learned that another woman had been pursued in the same park just 2 days earlier. As for us, we went on 2 more dates after that, but the weight of that night never left us. Gradually, we stopped talking. Since then, I've never used a dating app again. I know it wasn't the app's fault, but I've taken enough risks for one lifetime. It started like any other swipe-right success story. Her name was Carolyn, and she had this effortlessly charming profile. A picture of her laughing at some outdoor cafe, another of her hiking a wooded trail, and one of her holding a glass of wine at what looked like a cozy dinner party. Her bio read, "Writer, wine enthusiast, and amateur botanist. Swipe right if you can teach me something new." She was stunning, and the cherry on top, she seemed intelligent, clearly out of my league. Despite my fear of rejection, the chance to be with someone like her outweighed my reservations. I did everything I could to seize the opportunity. She was even more breathtaking in person, her smile lighting up the room, her presence magnetic. The bar she chose was perfect, intimate without being overly romantic, lively without being overcrowded. She had chosen the spot, confirming my suspicion that she was someone who could successfully plan things. Caroline had an intensity about her, a way of locking eyes that made you feel as though you were the only person in the room. She was quick-witted and sharp, but her curiosity had an edge to it. She asked deeply personal questions that felt invasive, yet disarmingly so. I can't quite explain it, but she had this way of making you feel incredibly uncomfortable, in a good way. As the night went on, the chaos of the city faded into the background. The lights dimmed, the drinks flowed, and the world seemed to narrow down to just the two of us. That initial sense of amazement I'd felt began to fade, replaced by a growing discomfort. When she suggested leaving the bar, her tone was light, her smile warm, but her eyes held something darker. My first instinct was to say no and leave. Her questions were becoming increasingly invasive, and I was visibly uneasy. On top of that, I wasn't one for one-night stands. I'd tried it once in college, and it had been a disaster. But the thought of being with someone like her stirred something in me again. I decided I needed to be bolder. I was just nervous, I told myself. If I wanted to step out of my comfort zone, this was the moment. We left the cafe, and she told me her place was just a few blocks away. We started walking, and though we didn't go far, I quickly realized she lived on the edge of the city. That cafe had been right at the borderline of a safe area, 2 blocks further, and the neighborhood was clearly more dangerous, older, and heavily vandalized. I wanted to turn back, but for some reason, I didn't. For some context, I'm not exactly a small guy. I don't scare easily. But the entire situation was making me feel terrified. When she said we'd arrived, I felt a bit more at ease. Her house wasn't as run down as the others, though it was small and not in the best shape. Still, nothing could have prepared me for what happened inside. We walked in, and she asked me to head to the living room. On the couch, a couple was watching TV. Completely caught off guard, I muttered a quick hello. Carolyn followed me in and casually introduced me to her parents as her boyfriend. Boyfriend? We hadn't even kissed. I figured she must have strict parents, and the only way they'd let me stay over was if they thought we were in a serious relationship. So I stayed quiet. A big mistake. The rest of the night was a series of red flags. To this day, I don't know how I endured it all. I should have left as soon as possible, but I felt trapped, like I'd been caught in a web I couldn't escape. The awkwardness of the evening lingered long after I left Caroline's house. Her parents had been polite but reserved, their expressions guarded, like they were in on some private joke I didn't understand. Caroline, however, was disarmingly casual, introducing me as her boyfriend with the same breezy confidence she'd shown all night. I played along, hoping it would get me out of there faster. When I finally excused myself and returned to my car, unease settled in my chest like a weight. Her intensity, her probing questions, and the way she'd introduced me to her parents. It all felt off. Rationally, I tried to dismiss it as a cultural quirk or misunderstanding, but deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I woke to 3 texts from Caroline. The first was a simple, "Good morning." The second was a photo of the coffee she was drinking, and the third asked if I wanted to have dinner that night. I stared at my phone, unsure how to respond. I replied with a polite excuse about being busy and put my phone down, hoping she'd get the hint, but she didn't. Her texts became more frequent and personal. Memes, messages about missing me, all after one date. I started ignoring her messages, but she escalated to calling. One voicemail stood out. She said she was outside the cafe where we'd first met, wondering if I'd join her. That was the final straw. I blocked her number and deleted Tinder, hoping to sever all ties. For a while, it worked. Life began to feel normal again, until I saw her. She was standing across the street under a street lamp, her face partially obscured by her hair. My heart sank. She didn't approach, didn't call out, just stood there, watching. I quickened my pace, pretending not to notice her. When I glanced back, she was gone. That wasn't the last time I saw her. Carolyn started appearing in random places, sitting on a bench at the park while I jogged, standing at the far end of the grocery store aisle, even across the parking lot at my office. She never approached me, but her presence was a constant reminder that she was watching. I finally went to the police. They took my concerns seriously and issued a restraining order against her. For a while, it seemed to work. I stopped seeing her around, and the tension in my chest started to ease. But she wasn't gone. Months later, late one night, I was closing the blinds in my living room when I saw her again. She was standing on the opposite sidewalk. She didn't move or speak. She just stared. That was the breaking point. I'd been considering moving for a while, not just because of her, but her persistence made it urgent. The decision was sealed when I left town for a week and asked a friend to take care of my cat. One night, Caroline showed up and rang the doorbell. She told my friend she was my girlfriend and had forgotten something in my room. Completely unaware of the situation and fooled by her confidence, he let her in. She spent a long time in my room. My friend tried calling me, but I was in a different time zone and missed the call. When I returned, he was racked with guilt. I assured him it wasn't his fault. She had deceived me too. But I couldn't shake the thought. What had she done in my room? Nothing was missing, but the intrusion was deeply unsettling. I changed my number, moved to a different apartment, and shared my new address with only a handful of people. But Caroline found me again. Not often, but just enough to remind me that she hadn't forgotten. A glimpse of her at a friend's birthday barbecue, a fleeting moment on the subway as the doors closed. She would vanish as quickly as she appeared, leaving me constantly on edge. I stopped dating altogether. The fear of letting someone new into my life, only for Caroline to resurface, was paralyzing. Sometimes I wondered if this was her goal. Not to harm me, but to keep me living in her shadow, always looking over my shoulder. Even now, as I write this, I can't shake the feeling that she's nearby, watching, waiting.